April 15th, 1931. Coney Island, Brooklyn. A card game ends with 4 bullets. The man who once dodged death at point-blank range couldn't dodge his own lieutenant tonight. Drift into sleep as we unravel the rise and fall of Yepa, Joe the Boss, Mezeria. The man who survived shootouts with 2 bullet holes in his hat, built an empire on blood and bootleg whiskey, and ultimately became the final victim of his own ambition. This is the true story of the boss who refused to change and paid the ultimate price. Before we journey back to 1886 Sicily, I want to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Are you in New York, where these streets once ran red? Or perhaps halfway across the globe, drawn to these dark tales of American history? Drop your location and the time in the comments below. And if you're new here, welcome to your bedtime mafia history. Hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. We have many more sleepy gangster stories coming your way. Give this video a like if you're ready for a deep dive into Joe Mezeria's world. Now, let's dim the lights. Get comfortable and travel back to Sicily, where a tailor's son would become New York's most feared crime boss. January 17, 1886, Menfi, Sicily. A small town in the province of Agrigento, nestled in the southwestern corner of Sicily, where the Mediterranean meets rolling hills of wheat and olive groves. Here, in a modest home that smells of thread and wool and honest labor, Maria Masseria gives birth to her son. They named him Giuseppe. His father is a tailor. As his father was before him, as is the way in Sicily, where professions pass from father to son like heirlooms. Like curses, the Masseria family is respectable. Not wealthy, but not poor either. They have enough in Sicily in 1886. Having enough is more than most can say, but Sicily is also the island of the Mafia. Not yet the organized crime empire that will dominate America, but something older, more primal. Here, the Mafia is a way of life. A shadow government that exists parallel to the official one. It is protection and extortion, justice and revenge, family and fear, all woven together into something that defies easy definition. Young Giuseppe Masseria grows up in this world, absorbing its lessons like water into dry earth. He learns that loyalty is everything, that blood is thicker than water, but respect is thicker than blood, that the law is for the weak, and true power comes not from judges and police, but from the fear and respect of your peers. When Giuseppe is still young, the family moves to Marsala, a coastal town in the westernmost part of Sicily. Marsala is known for its wine, its salt mines, and its secrets. Here, the Mafia's influence is even stronger, woven into every transaction, every business deal, every marriage proposal. Giuseppe's father continues his tailoring business, but the boy shows little interest in thread and needles. He is drawn instead to the streets, to the men who walk with swagger and confidence, whose words carry weight, who never seem to worry about where their next meal will come from. These men notice the tailor's son. He is smart, observant, quick with his hands and quicker with his mind. More importantly, he is fearless in the way that only the young can be. Before they've seen enough death to understand what they're courting, by the time Giuseppe Mezeria is a teenager, he has already been drawn into the orbit of Marsala's criminal underworld. Small things at first, running messages, keeping watch, learning when to speak and when to stay silent. But in Sicily, small things have a way of becoming big things very quickly. 1902. Giuseppe Mezeria is 16 years old, and his life in Sicily is over. The details are murky, lost to time and deliberate obscurity. What we know is this: Giuseppe Mezeria is wanted for murder. Whether he actually committed the crime is irrelevant. The accusation alone is enough to doom him in Sicily's Byzantine legal system, where mafia justice and official justice dance an intricate waltz, and the outcome often depends more on who you know than what you've done. But Giuseppe has one advantage that will save his life at this time. Italy and the United States have no extradition treaty. A wanted man in Sicily can become a free man in America. His crimes left behind like old clothes, molder in a drawer, an ocean away. The decision to flee is not made lightly. To leave Sicily is to abandon everything. Family, friends, the only world he has ever known. But Giuseppe Mezeria is young and ambitious. And America shimmers in his imagination like a promised land. A place where a man can reinvent himself. Where the chains of the old world can be broken. In 1902, he boards a ship in Palermo. The journey across the Atlantic takes weeks. Packed into steerage with hundreds of other immigrants, Sicilians, Italians from the mainland. Jews fleeing pogroms, Irish escaping famine's long shadow. The ship reeks of unwashed bodies, of vomit and fear and desperate hope. Giuseppe Mezeria stands at the rail, watching Sicily recede into the distance until it's nothing more than a smudge on the horizon. And then nothing at all. He will never return. The ship docks at Ellis Island on a gray morning in late spring. Giuseppe Mezeria, now 16 years old and alone in the world, steps onto American soil with nothing but the clothes on his back and a head full of ambitions that would terrify a less confident young man. He makes his way to Manhattan's Lower East Side, to the neighborhood known as Little Italy. Here, in a few cramped square miles, tens of thousands of Italian immigrants have recreated a version of the world they left behind. The streets smell of garlic and tomatoes, of baking bread and roasting coffee. Signs in Italian hang over every storefront. Sicilian dialect bounces off the tenement walls like music. But beneath this veneer of familiar comfort lies something darker. The poverty here is crushing, worse than anything Giuseppe knew in Sicily. Families of 8 or 10 live in 2-room apartments with no heat. No running water, shared toilets in the hallway. Children work 12-hour days in sweatshops for pennies. The promise of America, it turns out, comes with fine print written in the blood of the desperate. Into this world steps the Black Hand. La Mano Nera, not an organization exactly, but a method. Extortion dressed up in the trappings of old Sicilian rituals. The Black Hand sends letters to successful Italian business owners, demanding payment or promising violence. The letters are decorated with drawings of daggers, of coffins, of black hands. Sometimes they're marked with black palm prints made with ink or coal or blood. Giuseppe Mezeria, with his experience in Sicily's underworld and his lack of other prospects, is drawn to the Black Hand like iron to a magnet. Here is something he understands. Something that makes sense in this strange new world. Here is a way to transform fear into money. To survive in a place that seems designed to crush men like him. He starts small, collecting debts for men with stronger reputations. Standing behind someone more important, adding his presence to the weight of their threats. Learning which store owners will pay without resistance and which ones will need more convincing. But Giuseppe Mezeria is not content to remain a foot soldier. He watches, he learns, he makes connections. He identifies the real power players. Not the loudest men, but the quietest ones. The men who never make the threats themselves, but who always get paid, and he notices something else. The men with the real power, the lasting power, are not the independent Black Hand extortionists. They are the men connected to the Morello crime family. The Morello crime family is the first Italian-American Mafia family in New York. Established by Giuseppe the Clutch Hand Morello in the late 1890s, Morello is a legend. A man who escaped Sicily under a cloud of murder accusations and rebuilt his empire in Manhattan's East Harlem. The Morello family controls everything that matters in Italian Harlem. Gambling, prostitution, counterfeiting, extortion. They are sophisticated, organized, brutal. They are what the Black Hand pretends to be, real power, structured and sustainable. Giuseppe Mezeria sets his sights on joining them. It takes time. The Morello family doesn't accept just anyone, especially not a teenager with more ambition than accomplishments. But Masseria is patient, and more importantly, he is useful. He proves himself in the streets, collecting money that others can't collect, delivering messages that others are too afraid to deliver, settling disputes with his fists and occasionally with a knife. By 1903, at just 17 years old, Giuseppe Masseria has become an enforcer for the Morello crime family. His territory is Harlem and parts of Little Italy in southern Manhattan. He works alongside men who will become legends in their own right. Gaetano Reina, Ciro Terranova, and of course, Giuseppe Morello himself. Masseria discovers that he has a talent for violence. Not the wild, uncontrolled violence of the street thug, but calculated violence, violence as a tool, a language, a form of communication. He learns when to use his fists to make a point without causing lasting damage, and when to use a weapon to ensure there will be no second conversation needed. But more than his capacity for violence, Masseria develops a reputation for something else. He is a survivor. In the brutal Darwinian world of early Italian-American crime, where the life expectancy of an enforcer can be measured in months, Giuseppe Masseria endures. He is smart enough to avoid unnecessary risks, tough enough to win the fights he can't avoid, and perceptive enough to see trouble coming before it arrives. The other gangsters begin to call him Joe the Glutton because of his love of food and his expanding waistline. But there is respect in the nickname, not mockery. In a world where many men are too nervous to eat, Giuseppe Masseria's appetite is a sign of his confidence. Not every fight can be avoided, and not every crime goes unnoticed. On the night of November 3, 1909, Giuseppe Mezeria breaks into a pawn shop in Lower Manhattan. The job should be simple: get in, grab valuables, get out. But something goes wrong. Maybe a neighbor hears the glass break. Maybe a police officer happens to be walking his beat at the wrong time. When Mezeria emerges from the pawn shop, arms full of stolen goods, he finds himself face to face with two patrolmen. He drops the merchandise and runs, but these cops are young and fast. And the chase doesn't last long. Giuseppe is arrested for burglary. It's his first arrest in America, and he faces serious time. Burglary is not a minor charge, not something that gets dismissed with a fine and a warning. He could go to prison for years, effectively ending his criminal career before it's barely begun. But something remarkable happens at his trial. The judge, perhaps recognizing that Masseria is young and that this is his first offense, perhaps influenced by factors that never make it into the official record, gives him a suspended sentence. He walks free with a warning to stay out of trouble. Masseria stays out of trouble for exactly 3 years and 7 months. On May 23, 1913, Giuseppe Masseria is arrested again, this time for third-degree burglary. The circumstances are similar to his first arrest: breaking into a business after hours, grabbing what he can, getting caught. But this time, the judge is not so lenient. Masseria is sentenced to 4 to 6 years in prison. He serves his time in Sing Sing, the notorious prison up the Hudson River. Sing Sing in 1913 is a brutal place, overcrowded and violent, where men are broken down by hard labor and harder guards. But prison for Giuseppe Masseria is not a setback. It's an education. In Sing Sing, he meets other gangsters, forms new connections, learns new skills. He comes out harder than he went in, more connected, more respected. By the time he walks free sometime around 1916, Giuseppe Masseria has transformed from a street-level enforcer into something more. He has become a lieutenant in the Morello organization, a man with authority, with a crew of his own, with ambitions that stretch far beyond simple burglary. The timing of his release could not be better, because by 1916, the Morello family is in crisis. and Giuseppe Mezeria sees opportunity in the chaos. The story of Giuseppe Morello is the story of Italian-American organized crime in its infancy. The Clutch Hand, as he was known due to a deformity that left his right hand twisted and claw-like, was the first true Italian crime boss in New York. But by 1916, Morello's empire is crumbling in 1909, the same year that Giuseppe Mezeria got his first suspended sentence. Giuseppe Morello was arrested for running a massive counterfeiting operation, along with several associates, including the infamous Ignazio Lupo the Wolf Zaida. Morello was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. With Morello locked away in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, his family fragmented. Various captains and lieutenants attempted to take control, each claiming to be Morello's rightful successor. The family that had once dominated Italian Harlem was now split into competing factions, each warring for control of the lucrative rackets. One of those lieutenants was Nicholas Morello. Giuseppe's brother, Nick Morello, tried to hold the family together, but he faced opposition from other powerful families, particularly the one led by Salvatore Dquila, a Brooklyn-based boss who saw the Morello family's weakness as an opportunity to expand his own power. Then on September 7, 1916, Nick Morello was murdered. He was shot to death in front of a cafe in Brooklyn, executed in broad daylight as a message to anyone who might challenge Dquila's supremacy. With Nick Morello gone, the family was in complete disarray. Various factions continued to fight for control, and into this power vacuum stepped Giuseppe Mezeria, recently released from prison and hungry for advancement. Masseria aligned himself with what remained of the Morello faction, but he was also careful to avoid making enemies unnecessarily. He was young, ambitious, but also pragmatic. He understood the time wasn't right yet to make a move for leadership, but he was positioning himself, building alliances, proving his worth. By the time the 1910s ended, Giuseppe Mezeria had become one of the most important figures in what remained of the Morello crime family. But he faced a significant obstacle in his path to power: Salvatore Dquila, the boss who had ordered Nick Morello's death and who now claimed to be the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses, the advisor to all the New York families. The stage was set for a war that would define New York's criminal underworld for years to come. Giuseppe Mezeria's territory in East Harlem during the late 1910s is a world unto itself. Here, among the tenements and social clubs, the storefront churches and illegal gambling dens, he builds his reputation one intimidation at a time, one collection at a time, one demonstration of violence at a time. Harlem in this era is not yet the cultural capital of Black America that it will become in the 1920s. That transformation is just beginning. Instead, Italian Harlem, Spanish Harlem as it's also known, though the Spanish population is still relatively small, is a dense warren of Italian immigrants, primarily from Sicily and Naples, packed into buildings that were never meant to hold so many people. It is in this environment that Masseria thrives. He understands the psychology of the immigrant community. He knows that most of these people came to America to escape the Mafia's influence in Italy, only to find that the Mafia followed them across the ocean. He knows that they are suspicious of police, who they see as corrupt and hostile. He knows that they would rather pay protection money to men like him than risk the violence and chaos that might come if they refuse. Mezzeria's operation during these years is multifaceted. There's the traditional protection racket. Store owners pay a weekly or monthly fee, and in exchange are assured that no other gangs bother them, that their windows don't get broken, that their suppliers don't have mysterious problems making deliveries. It's a classic arrangement. Parasitic but stable, the store owners hate paying. But they also recognize that in the ecosystem of Harlem's underworld, Masseria is a relatively reasonable predator. Then there are the gambling operations, card games, dice games. Numbers rackets, Italians love to gamble, and Masseria provides plenty of opportunities. He takes a percentage of every pot, every bet, every game played in establishments under his protection. It's steady money, reliable money. The kind of income stream that allows him to expand his operations and his influence. And there is the labor racketeering. The docks, the construction sites, the factories, all of these employ Italian laborers. And all of them are vulnerable to strikes, slowdowns, accidents. Masseria, through his connections with various labor organizers, some legitimate, some controlled by the mob, can ensure that work continues smoothly for a price. He can also ensure that work stops if someone refuses to pay or shows disrespect. But Masseria's real genius during this period is not in any single racket, but in his ability to cultivate relationships. He befriends politicians, police officers, judges, anyone whose favor might prove useful. He is careful never to be the loudest voice in any room, never to draw unnecessary attention. He lets others take credit, take the spotlight, while he accumulates the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. In 1920, Giuseppe Mezeria makes a decision that will change both his life and the future of American organized crime. He recruits a young Sicilian named Salvatore Dquila as one of his gunmen. Salvatore Dquila, who will soon be known to the world as Charles Lucky Luciano, is just 23 years old when Masseria brings him into the organization. But he is already a veteran of New York streets, born in Sicily in 1897. Dquila immigrated to America with his family in 1906, settling in Manhattan's Lower East Side. Young Salvatore Dquila quickly proved himself to be different from other immigrant children. While his parents dreamed that he might become a tailor or a shopkeeper, Salvatore dreamed bigger. By age 10, he was already running a protection racket in his own school, extorting other children for pennies. By his teens, he was working for the 5 Points Gang, one of the most notorious street gangs in Manhattan, alongside a young Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. Luciano, he had already begun Americanizing his name, had two qualities that set him apart. First, unlike the traditional Sicilian gangsters, he was willing to work with anyone. Jews, Irish, even African Americans, if there was money to be made. This was heresy to the old guard Sicilians, who believed that the Mafia should remain strictly Italian, preferably strictly Sicilian. But Luciano understood that ethnic tribalism was a limitation, that the real money lay in cooperation across ethnic lines. Second, Luciano was a natural businessman. He understood that the key to long-term success in organized crime was not the size of your gun or the fierceness of your reputation, but the soundness of your business model. He thought about cash flow, about market share, about vertical integration. He was, in many ways, the first modern gangster. When Masseria recruits Luciano in 1920, he recognizes the younger man's potential, but also fatally fails to recognize the threat he represents. Masseria sees Luciano as a useful tool, a talented lieutenant who can help expand his operations. What he doesn't see is that Luciano has ambitions that match and exceed his own, and that Luciano's vision for the future of organized crime is fundamentally incompatible with Masseria's old world ways. But in 1920, none of that matters. What matters is that Masseria has just recruited one of the most talented criminals of his generation, and the timing could not be more perfect. Because on January 17, 1920, Giuseppe Mezzeria's 34th birthday, something happens that will transform American crime forever. The 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution takes effect. Prohibition begins overnight. The manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages becomes illegal across the United States. It's impossible to overstate the impact of Prohibition on American organized crime. Before 1920, gangsters were primarily involved in traditional rackets: gambling, prostitution, Extortion, labor racketeering, these were profitable. But they were also limited in scope. There was only so much money to be made from protection rackets and numbers games. But Prohibition created something unprecedented. A massive nationwide black market for a product that millions of Americans desperately wanted. Alcohol didn't stop being consumed when it became illegal. It simply stopped being legal to consume, and that meant that someone had to produce it. Someone had to transport it, and someone had to distribute it. That someone, across America, increasingly became organized crime. For Italian-American gangsters like Joe, Prohibition is a gift from heaven, suddenly. The skills that made them successful in small-time rackets. The ability to evade law enforcement, to intimidate competitors, to organize complex illegal operations, become applicable to an industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Masseria moves quickly to capitalize on the opportunity. He establishes relationships with bootleggers in Canada and rum runners in the Caribbean who can provide a steady supply of quality alcohol. He sets up a network of speakeasies, illegal bars, across Manhattan and the Bronx, each paying him for protection and for the privilege of selling his liquor. He organizes a fleet of trucks to transport the booze from the docks and borders, where it enters the country to the establishments, where it will be sold. The money starts pouring in, not the nickels and dimes of protection rackets, but serious money, thousands of dollars a week, tens of thousands of dollars a month. Giuseppe Mezeria, who grew up the son of a tailor in Sicily, is becoming wealthy in a way that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. But Prohibition doesn't just create opportunities, it also creates competition. And one of Mezzeria's primary competitors is the man who ordered the death of Nick Morello. Salvatore Dquila. Salvatore Dquila is, in many ways, Mezzeria's opposite, where Masseria is loud and gregarious. Dquila is quiet and calculating, where Masseria builds power through intimidation and force. Dquila builds it through careful diplomacy and strategic alliances. Where Masseria is content to dominate his territory through fear, Dquila has grander ambitions. He wants to be recognized as the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses, the advisor to all of New York's Italian crime families in the early 1920s. Dquila is arguably the most powerful Italian gangster in New York. His Brooklyn-based organization controls significant bootlegging operations, and he has successfully positioned himself as an elder statesman among the various Italian crime families. When disputes arise between families, they often turn to Dquila to mediate. This gives him enormous influence, even over families he doesn't directly control. But Dquila's power is built on a fragile foundation. He is respected, but he is also resented. Many of the younger gangsters, men like Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, see him as a dinosaur, a representative of old Sicilian traditions that have no place in modern America. They chafe under his attempts to maintain ethnic purity in the Mafia, his refusal to work with non-Italians, his insistence on following the old codes of honor and respect. Giuseppe Mezeria, by the early 1920s, has positioned himself as the primary rival to Dquila's dominance. Where Dquila represents the old ways, Masseria represents something newer, though still not as modern as what Luciano will eventually create. Masseria is willing to be more flexible, more aggressive, more willing to challenge the established order. The tension between Masseria and Dquila simmers throughout 1920 and 1921, occasionally boiling over into violence, but never quite erupting into full-scale war. Both men are cautious, recognizing that a war would be expensive and destructive. But both also know that eventually there will need to be a reckoning. New York isn't big enough for both of them to be boss. Dquila strikes first. He orders his top gunman, Umberto Valenti, to eliminate the Masseria threat once and for all. Umberto Valenti is a killer, plain and simple, not a businessman. Not a strategist, not a politician. He's a man who solves problems with bullets. And he is very, very good at it. Dquila has chosen his weapon well. The campaign against Masseria begins not with Masseria himself, but with his allies. Dquila and Valenti understand that power is built on alliances. With what remains of the old Morello family weakened, those alliances and Masseria becomes vulnerable. On May 8, 1922, Vincenzo Terranova, boss of what remains of the Morello Terranova crime family, is killed in a drive-by shooting near his home on East 116th Street. The hit is professional, brutal, and effective. Terranova is dead before the car even finishes speeding away, but Valenti isn't finished. Just hours later, Terranova's underboss, Silva Tagliagamba, is fatally wounded in Lower Manhattan. Valenti and his gunmen shoot him multiple times in broad daylight, then disappear into the crowded streets before police can respond. The message is clear. Dquila is coming for everyone associated with the Masseria faction, and he will not stop until they are all dead or driven out of New York. That night, Valenti makes his move on Masseria himself. Mezeria is on Grand Street with several of his bodyguards, conducting business when Valenti and his men appear. The location is deliberately chosen. They're within a block of police headquarters, and Valenti is betting that Masseria will be too surprised to mount an effective defense before Valenti can finish the job. Gunfire erupts in the street. Masseria's bodyguards return fire, but they're outgunned and outmaneuvered. In the chaos, Masseria makes a desperate decision. He throws his pistol away and flees. It's an inglorious escape. Not the kind of thing that builds a reputation. When the shooting stops, 4 men and 2 women have been wounded. Miraculously, none fatally, except for the targeted victims. Police arrest Mezeria as he's fleeing the scene, and while he's released shortly after, no one is willing to testify against him. The entire episode is humiliating. Umberto Valenti has proven that Giuseppe Mezeria is vulnerable, that for all his power and influence, he can be hunted, he can be scared, he can be made to run. In the Darwinian world of organized crime, this is often a death sentence. Weakness once demonstrated is almost impossible to overcome. But Giuseppe Mezeria is not finished, and 3 months later, he will face the most famous moment of his life. The incident that will transform him from just another gangster into a legend. The shooting that will earn him a nickname that will echo through the decades. The man who can dodge bullets, August 9th, 1922. Dawn's hot and humid in New York City. The kind of summer day where the heat seems to rise from the pavement in waves. Where even the slightest movement causes sweat on your forehead. Where tempers are short and violence simmers just below the surface of every interaction. Giuseppe Mezeria wakes in his apartment on 2nd Avenue in the heart of the Lower East Side. He's been living here for several months. Ever since the shooting on Grand Street made it clear that his previous residence was too well known to be safe. The apartment is modest by the standards he's now used to. Prohibition money has made him wealthy. But it's in a building with multiple exits in a neighborhood he knows intimately. Surrounded by people loyal to him, or at least afraid of him. Mezeria has been expecting another attempt on his life ever since the May shootings. Umberto Valenti is not the kind of man who gives up after one failure. And Salvatore Dquila is not the kind of boss who accepts defeat. Mezeria knows that Valenti is out there somewhere, watching, waiting for an opportunity. But knowing danger is coming and being able to prevent it are 2 different things. Mezeria cannot hide forever. He has an empire to run, money to collect, respect to maintain. If he disappears, if he shows too much fear, his organization will begin to crumble. His men will start to wonder if perhaps Valenti is right, if perhaps Mezeria's time has passed. So on this hot August morning, Giuseppe Mezeria does what he always does. He gets up, he gets dressed, he puts on his signature straw hat, and he prepares to face the day. He has appointments to keep, people to see, business that cannot wait. He steps out of the front door of his building on 2nd Avenue at approximately 10:30 a.m. Two men are waiting for him. They come from different directions. One from the left, one from the right, boxing him in before he can react. Professional, practiced. These are not street thugs or amateur killers. These are experienced assassins. And they have only one target. The first shot misses. It has to. Because Masseria moves not with any plan or strategy, but with pure survival instinct honed over 2 decades of life in the underworld. He throws himself sideways, even as the crack of the gunshot echoes off the tenement buildings. The second shot also misses, but only barely. Masseria can feel it pass close enough to warm the air near his face. He's running now, running for his life. Running for the only shelter he can see, a store on 2nd Avenue. Just a few doors down from his apartment, the proprietor, an old Italian man who pays Masseria protection money and who knows better than to get involved, sees what's coming and simply drops behind his counter, hands over his head, praying to saints, both legitimate and questionable, that the violence will pass him by. Masseria crashes through the door of the shop with all the grace of a wounded bear. Behind him, his assassins are in pursuit, their guns out and firing with no regard for the civilians on the street. The mothers with children, the old men sitting in the sun, the vendors selling vegetables from pushcarts. The front window of the shop explodes inward in a shower of glass. Masseria throws himself to the floor as bullets punch through shelves, ricochet off metal fixtures, embed themselves in wooden walls. The shooting seems to go on forever. In reality, it probably lasts less than a minute. 60 seconds of concentrated violence. It feels like an eternity when you're the target. The two gunmen fire and fire and fire, emptying their weapons into the small store, determined to finish the job that Valenti started 3 months ago. And then, as suddenly as it began, the shooting stops. The assassins, their guns empty, make a decision. They could reload, could enter the shop and finish Masseria at close range. But they've been shooting in broad daylight in one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in Manhattan. Police will be arriving any moment, and surely, with that many bullets fired into such a small space, the target must be dead. They flee inside the shop. Giuseppe Masseria lies on the floor, covered in broken glass and plaster dust, his ears ringing from the gunfire, his heart hammering so hard he thinks it might burst from his chest. He does a quick mental inventory of his body, checking for the wet warmth of blood, the sharp pain of a bullet wound. Nothing. He is untouched, not a scratch. Slowly, carefully he stands. The shop around him looks like a war zone, bullet holes everywhere. In the walls, in the ceiling, in the merchandise. The front window is completely destroyed. Shell casings litter the floor, but Giuseppe Masseria is alive. When the police arrive, and they arrive quickly, drawn by reports of what sounds like a small war erupting in the middle of 2nd Avenue, they find a scene that defies belief. The shop has been absolutely destroyed by gunfire. Witnesses estimate that at least 20 shots were fired, possibly more, and yet somehow, impossibly, the target has survived. Police find Masseria in his apartment, still in a state of shock, but otherwise completely unharmed. He is, as always, unhelpful when it comes to identifying his attackers. No, he doesn't know who they were. No, he has no enemies. No, he has no idea why anyone would want to shoot him. It was all a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity. He's just an honest businessman who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police don't believe him for a second, but without his cooperation, there's little they can do. They take their statements, they collect evidence, and they leave, knowing that this is just one more chapter in the ongoing war between New York's Italian crime families. But before they leave, one of the officers notices something. Mezzeria's straw hat, which he was wearing when the shooting started, sits on a table in his apartment. The officer picks it up, examines it, and then shows it to his colleagues. The hat has 2 bullet holes clean through it, one on each side, as if the bullets passed through right where Mezzeria's head should have been. The officer looks at Masseria, then at the hat, then back at Masseria. "You're one lucky son of a gun," he says. Masseria just smiles. "In Sicily, we have a saying, 'God protects the just.'" The officer snorts. "Yeah, well, God must have a strange sense of justice." The story of Giuseppe Mezeria and his bullet-riddled hat spreads through New York's underworld like wildfire. Within days, everyone in Little Italy, East Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn, everyone knows about the man who survived 20 shots at point-blank range, who emerged from a storm of bullets without a scratch, whose only injury was 2 holes in his hat. The story grows in the telling, as such stories always do. Some versions have him dodging 50 bullets. Some have him catching bullets in his teeth. Some have him turning invisible, or having a deal with the devil, or wearing a vest made of magical Sicilian cloth that repels bullets. But the core story remains the same, and it is remarkable enough without embellishment. Joe walked into a hail of gunfire that should have killed him 10 times over, and he walked out alive. They start calling him Joe the Boss, but more importantly, they call him the man who can dodge bullets. This nickname, this legend, transforms Masseria in the eyes of both his allies and his enemies. In the superstitious world of early 20th century Italian gangsters, where belief in the evil eye and protective saints and signs and omens is still very much alive, Mezzeria's survival is seen as proof of divine favor or supernatural protection. Men who might have challenged him before now think twice. Enemies who might have moved against him now hesitate. After all, if Umberto Valenti, one of the most feared hitmen in New York, couldn't kill him, who could for Masseria? The shooting and his miraculous survival is a turning point. He goes from being just another powerful gangster to being something more. A figure of legend, a man marked by fate, someone who cannot be killed by ordinary means. He cultivates this image carefully. He continues wearing straw hats, often joking about needing extras because of all the bullet holes. He speaks cryptically about his survival, implying that he has protection from forces beyond the understanding of normal men. He allows the mythology to grow around him, understanding that fear and respect based on legend can be even more powerful than fear and respect based on actual violence. But the shooting on August 9, 1922, has another consequence, one that will prove even more important than Mezzeria's growing legend. It convinces him that Umberto Valenti must die. After the failed assassination attempt, Umberto Valenti goes into hiding. He knows that Masseria will be coming for him, and that now Masseria has the added motivation of revenge. Valenti moves from apartment to apartment, never staying in one place for more than a few nights, always surrounded by bodyguards, always watchful. But Valenti has a weakness, and Giuseppe Mezeria knows what it is: arrogance. Valenti is proud of his reputation as a killer. He cannot resist boasting about his exploits, cannot resist being seen in public places where other gangsters will witness his swagger and his confidence. For a man in hiding, he is remarkably visible. Mezeria makes his preparations carefully. He assigns the job to some of his best men, but he also makes sure to provide them with detailed intelligence about Valenti's movements, his habits, his favorite places, and then he waits for the right opportunity. It comes on August 11th, 1922. Just 2 days after the shooting that failed to kill Mezeria, Valenti is spotted on Grand Street, the same area where he staged his first attack on Masseria 3 months earlier. He's at a cafe, relaxed, having coffee, perhaps feeling that the danger has passed now, that he's successfully demonstrated Mezzeria's vulnerability. He's wrong. Mezzeria's men enter the cafe with guns drawn. Valenti sees them and tries to flee, knocking over tables and chairs in his desperation to reach the back exit. But they've anticipated this. There are men waiting in the alley behind the cafe. Blocking his escape, Umberto Valenti, a feared assassin who killed Vincenzo Terranova and Silva Tagliagamba, who hunted Giuseppe Masseria through the streets of Manhattan, dies in a New York alley with multiple bullet wounds. He is 29 years old, with Valenti dead. Salvatore Dquila's campaign against Masseria loses its primary weapon. Dquila still has men, still has money, still has influence. But he no longer has the initiative, no longer has momentum. The war that began with such promise for him has turned into a stalemate. And a stalemate favors Masseria, who is younger, hungrier, and now has the aura of invincibility, Dquila. Recognizing that he cannot win a direct confrontation with a man who can dodge bullets, pulls back, the violence subsides. A cold peace settles over New York's Italian underworld. Not because the conflict is resolved, but because both sides are exhausted, and neither can deliver a knockout blow. Giuseppe Masseria emerges from the war with Dquila transformed. He is no longer just another boss among several. He is Joe the Boss, the man who survived the unsurvivable, who killed the unkillable, who cannot be defeated by ordinary means. It is the beginning of his golden age in the aftermath of the war with Dquila. Giuseppe Mezeria sets about building an organization that will dominate New York for nearly a decade. He takes control of what remains of the Morello crime family, absorbing their operations into his own, treating their territory as his territory, their men as his men. The Morello family, which once dominated Italian Harlem, is now essentially extinct as an independent entity. Giuseppe Morello himself, the clutch hand, is still in federal prison and will remain there until 1920. When he is finally released, he will return not as a boss, but as a consigliere, an advisor to the man who has taken his place, Giuseppe Masseria. Masseria's organization in the early 1920s is a marvel of efficiency for its time. Unlike the chaotic, personality-driven gangs that preceded it, Masseria's family is structured, organized, businesslike. He has captains who oversee specific operations: bootlegging, gambling, labor racketeering, loan sharking. Each captain has his own crew, his own territory, his own responsibilities. They report to Masseria, pay him tribute, and in exchange receive his protection and the right to use his name and reputation in their own operations. This organizational structure is not new. The Sicilian Mafia had something similar for generations, but in America, it represents a significant evolution from the more informal arrangements that prevailed in the 1910s. Masseria is creating something that can outlast individual members, something that can survive arrests and assassinations, because it's based on positions and functions rather than just personal relationships. His territory expands rapidly. By 1923, Masseria controls significant portions of Manhattan, the Bronx, and parts of Brooklyn. His bootlegging operation brings in millions of dollars annually. He owns speakeasies, gambling dens, brothels. He has politicians on his payroll, police officers who tip him off to raids, judges who dismiss charges against his men. But more than any specific operation, Masseria's greatest asset is his growing stable of talented lieutenants. The men he recruits and promotes during this period will become legends in their own right, names that will echo through the history of American organized crime. Charles "Lucky" Luciano, already Masseria's primary gunman in 1920, rises steadily through the organization. By the mid-1920s, he is effectively Masseria's underboss, the number 2 man in the family. Luciano oversees much of the day-to-day operations, handles disputes between captains, and increasingly represents Masseria in meetings with other families. But Luciano is not alone. Masseria has a talent for identifying young criminals with exceptional abilities, And throughout the 1920s, he assembles a team that represents the future of American organized crime, Vito Genovese. A young Neapolitan with a gift for violence and no compunction about using it. Genovese becomes one of Masseria's most trusted enforcers. The man you call when someone needs to be reminded of the consequences of disobedience. Frank Costello, smooth, intelligent, politically connected. Costello is the businessman of the group, the one who can sit down with legitimate politicians and businessmen and make deals that benefit everyone. He understands that the key to long-term success is not just muscle, but influence in the legitimate world. Albert Anastasia, a brutal enforcer who will later become known as the Lord High Executioner for his role in running murder. Inc. Anastasia is loyal to Masseria, but he's also ambitious, always looking for opportunities to increase his own power and wealth. Joe Adonis, charming and ruthless in equal measure. Adonis runs much of Masseria's Brooklyn operations and has his own ambitions for expansion. And then there are Masseria's Jewish associates, men like Meyer Lansky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Unlike traditional Sicilian bosses who refuse to work with non-Italians, Masseria is pragmatic enough to recognize talent regardless of ethnicity. Lansky, in particular, proves invaluable with his genius for money laundering and financial organization. Together, these men form the core of Masseria's empire. They are young, talented, ambitious, and absolutely ruthless. They represent the future of organized crime, multi-ethnic, business-focused, more interested in making money than in preserving old Sicilian traditions. But they also represent a potential threat, because each of them is smart enough to realize that the organization could be even more profitable, even more powerful if it were run differently. If it were run by someone more willing to embrace the modern world, to abandon the old ways, to think of crime as a business rather than as a way of life. For now, though, they are loyal to Masseria, and Masseria, secure in his legend as the man who can dodge bullets, does not see the danger. The mid to late 1920s are the golden age of American organized crime, and Giuseppe Mezeria is perfectly positioned to capitalize on it. Prohibition is in full swing, and the demand for illegal alcohol is insatiable. Every speakeasy in New York needs a supplier. Every party needs a bootlegger. Every politician needs a drink. And Masseria controls a significant portion of the supply. His bootlegging operation is sophisticated and extensive. He has connections with suppliers in Canada who provide high-quality whiskey and rum. He has relationships with corrupt customs officials who look the other way when his trucks cross the border. He owns a fleet of boats that bring rum from the Caribbean to hidden docks along the Long Island coast. The logistics of the operation are staggering. Every week, thousands of gallons of illegal alcohol flow through Masseria's network. It's stored in warehouses, transported in specially modified trucks, distributed to hundreds of speakeasies and private clubs. The whole operation requires coordination, timing, and the ability to respond quickly when law enforcement interferes. But Prohibition enforcement in 1920s is notoriously corrupt and ineffective. The federal agents tasked with stopping the flow of illegal alcohol are overworked, underpaid, and often willing to accept bribes. Local police are even worse in many neighborhoods. The cops are essentially on Masseria's payroll, providing protection and advance warning of raids in exchange for monthly payments. The money Masseria makes from bootlegging is almost incomprehensible. In a good week, his organization might gross $100,000 or more. That's the equivalent of several million in today's money. And it's coming in week after week, month after month, year after year. With this money comes power, not just power in the underworld, but power in the legitimate world as well. Masseria begins to invest in legal businesses, nightclubs, restaurants, real estate. He makes loans to businessmen who can't get credit from legitimate banks. He becomes a patron of the arts, or at least of certain artists. Italian tenors, opera singers, musicians who remind him of Sicily. He lives well. Gone are the days of tenement apartments and modest living. Masseria now has a large home, fine clothes, expensive cars. He eats at the best restaurants, often ones he owns. He vacations in Florida and Cuba. He has become, by any measure, rich. But with wealth and power come enemies. And while Masseria has defeated Umberto Valenti and stalemated Salvatore Dquila, new threats are emerging. In Brooklyn, a rising boss named Salvatore Maranzano is building his own empire, recruiting aggressively from the Castellammarese region of Sicily. In Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, other bosses are consolidating their own power, each with their own ambitions and their own ideas about how organized crime should be structured. Masseria's response is characteristically aggressive. He demands tribute from other families, arguing that as the most powerful boss in New York, he deserves compensation from anyone operating in the city. He pressures smaller families to join his organization or face the consequences. He begins to style himself not just as Joe the Boss, but as the boss of bosses, the capo di tutti capi. This arrogance, this belief in his own invincibility, will prove to be his undoing. Because while Masseria has been building his empire and living well, the world has been changing around him. New ideas about how organized crime should operate are taking hold. A new generation of gangsters, more business-minded and less traditional, is rising to power. And at the head of that new generation stands Lucky Luciano, Masseria's own protege, quietly making plans that will reshape American organized crime and ensure that Giuseppe Masseria's golden age ends in blood. By 1928, cracks are beginning to appear in Giuseppe Masseria's empire. Though he either doesn't see them or chooses to ignore them, the first crack is generational. The young men who make up the core of Masseria's organization, Luciano, Genovese, Costello, and the others, are increasingly frustrated with what they see as Masseria's old-fashioned approach. They chafe at his insistence on maintaining Sicilian traditions, his suspicion of non-Italians, his preference for violence and intimidation over negotiation and cooperation. These young Turks, as they will later be called, have a different vision for organized crime. They see crime as a business, not as a way of life or a cultural tradition. They want to work with other ethnic groups, Jews, Irish, even the emerging African-American gangs, because they recognize that cooperation means more money for everyone. They want to reduce violence because violence is bad for business, draws police attention, and disrupts the steady flow of profits. But when they try to bring these ideas to Masseria, he dismisses them. He reminds them that he is the boss, that he survived when others died, that his way has proven successful. Why change what works? The second crack is territorial. Other bosses in New York are tired of paying tribute to Masseria. They resent his claim to be the boss of bosses. They particularly resent his demands for a percentage of their earnings, arguing that each family should keep what it earns. Chief among these resentful bosses is Salvatore Maranzano, who has been building power in Brooklyn by recruiting heavily from the Castellammarese region of Sicily. The Castellamarese are clannish, loyal to each other, suspicious of outsiders, including Sicilians from other regions. Maranzano uses this regional loyalty to build an organization that rivals Masseria's in size and discipline. Maranzano is also building alliances with other families who resent Masseria's dominance. He's careful, moving slowly, not making his ambitions too obvious. But those who are paying attention can see what's happening. Maranzano is preparing for war. The third crack is internal. Lucky Luciano, Masseria's trusted underboss, is having secret meetings with members of other families. He's building relationships, making promises, positioning himself. He's also having conversations with Meyer Lansky and other Jewish gangsters about how organized crime should be restructured, about how the old ethnic divisions are obstacles to profit. about how a commission of equals would be better than a single boss of bosses. Masseria either doesn't know about these meetings or doesn't take them seriously. He trusts Luciano, relies on him, sees him almost as a son. The possibility that Luciano might betray him seems impossible. After all, Masseria made Luciano. Everything Luciano has, he owes to Masseria. Why would he risk that? The fourth crack, and perhaps the most significant, is Masseria's own growing arrogance. The legend of the man who can dodge bullets has become, in his own mind, proof of invincibility. He has survived so much: the poverty of Sicily, the streets of New York, prison, multiple assassination attempts, war with Dquila. He has emerged from every crisis stronger than before. This history of survival breeds a dangerous confidence. Masseria begins to believe that he cannot be defeated, that he is protected by fate or God or some combination of the two. He takes risks he shouldn't take, dismisses warnings he should heed, ignores threats he should take seriously. In October 1928, one of those threats is eliminated, though not by Masseria's hand. Salvatore Dquila, who has been Masseria's rival for nearly a decade, is assassinated as he leaves a doctor's office on Avenue A. He is shot multiple times by unknown gunmen who disappear into the crowded streets before police can respond. Dquila's death is officially unsolved, but everyone in the underworld knows what happened. One of Dquila's own men betrayed him, likely after making a deal with Masseria. It's a classic mob hit, the kind that sends a clear message. No one is safe, not even in their own family. Not even bosses who have ruled for years. Masseria celebrates Dquila's death as a triumph. His old enemy is gone, his primary rival eliminated. He is now unquestionably the most powerful Italian gangster in New York. He throws a party, invites all the important people, basks in his victory. What he doesn't realize is that Dquila's death has removed one of the last obstacles preventing full-scale war with Salvatore Maranzano. And he certainly doesn't realize that his own lieutenants, led by Lucky Luciano, are already planning his own demise. The golden age is ending. The Castellammarese War is about to begin. Salvatore Maranzano arrives in America in 1925, a latecomer to the Prohibition gold rush, but a man with grand ambitions and the skills to achieve them. Unlike many Italian immigrants, Maranzano is educated. He studied for the priesthood in his youth and speaks multiple languages. He's well versed in history, particularly Roman history, and he dreams of building an organization modeled on Caesar's legions. But Maranzano is also a gangster, and a ruthless one, back in Sicily. He was a powerful figure in the Mafia, and he brings that experience and those connections with him to America. He settles in Brooklyn and immediately begins recruiting, focusing particularly on immigrants from Castellammarese del Golfo, a region in northwestern Sicily. The Castellamarese are a clannish group, suspicious of outsiders, loyal to each other above all else. This regional loyalty gives Maranzano a natural base of support, a group of men who will follow him because of their shared origins, regardless of who else is more powerful or more established. By 1929, Maranzano has built a formidable organization. His family controls bootlegging operations in Brooklyn, has gambling rackets across the borough, and has established relationships with suppliers and corrupt officials. More importantly, Maranzano has positioned himself as an alternative to Giuseppe Masseria's dominance. Where Masseria is loud and aggressive, Maranzano is quiet and calculating. Where Masseria demands tribute, Maranzano offers partnership. Where Masseria relies on his legend and reputation, Maranzano relies on organization and discipline. He models his family on Roman military structures, with clearly defined ranks and responsibilities, with a chain of command that ensures orders are followed efficiently. But Maranzano's ambitions extend beyond just running a successful crime family. He wants to restructure the entire Italian-American Mafia, to create a system where families operate independently but cooperate when necessary, where disputes are settled by arbitration rather than war, where bosses are equals rather than subordinates to a single boss of bosses. This vision puts him on a collision course with Giuseppe Masseria, who has no intention of sharing power or accepting equals. Masseria sees himself as the boss of bosses, and he expects other families to acknowledge his supremacy and pay him tribute. The question is not whether war will come, but when and what spark will ignite it. Gaetano Reina is the boss of what will later become the Lucchese crime family. His territory is primarily the Bronx, and he runs a disciplined, profitable organization by all accounts. Reina is a reasonable man, not particularly violent, more interested in making money than in making war. But Reina has two problems. First, he's technically under Masseria's umbrella, expected to pay tribute and follow Masseria's lead. Second, he's tired of it. Reina resents Masseria's demands, resents paying a percentage of his earnings to someone who doesn't do anything to earn it, resents being treated as a subordinate when he's perfectly capable of running his own operation. So Reina begins talking to Salvatore Maranzano. The conversations are careful, oblique, deniable if they need to be, but the message is clear. Reina is considering defecting from Masseria's orbit and joining with Maranzano. This is exactly the kind of threat that Masseria cannot tolerate. If Reina defects, others might follow. His entire system of tribute and control could collapse. Masseria needs to send a message, and he needs to send it in a way that no one can misunderstand. On February 26, 1930, Gaetano Reina is leaving his aunt's house in the Bronx when a man approaches him on the street. The man is Vito Genovese, one of Masseria's most trusted enforcers. Genovese is carrying a shotgun hidden under a coat. He shoots Reina once in the back of the head at point-blank range. The boss of the Bronx is dead before he hits the ground. The murder of Gaetano Reina marks the official beginning of what will become known as the Castellammarese War. Though at the time, no one realizes how long and bloody the conflict will become. Masseria believes he has solved the problem, eliminated a potential traitor, sent a message to anyone else who might be considering defection. Instead, he has started a war that will consume New York's Italian underworld for over a year, will kill dozens of men, and will ultimately cost him everything. The death of Gaetano Reina does not have the effect intended. Instead of frightening other families into submission, it drives them toward Maranzano. Reina's family, now led by Tommy Gagliano, immediately defects to Maranzano's side. Other families begin reaching out to Maranzano, asking about alliances, offering support. Maranzano recognizes the opportunity. He positions himself as the defender of the old Sicilian values, the man standing against Masseria's greed and tyranny. He frames the coming war not as a power grab, but as a necessary response to Masseria's overreach. He's not trying to become boss of bosses, he claims. He's trying to prevent anyone from being boss of bosses. It's brilliant propaganda, and it works. By the spring of 1930, New York's Italian crime families have essentially split into two camps: those loyal to Masseria and those allied with Maranzano. Masseria's side includes his own family, the largest and most powerful, the Morello faction. Now fully absorbed into Masseria's organization, parts of the Brooklyn families, various independent operators who fear Maranzano more than they resent Masseria. Maranzano's side includes his own Castellammarese family, the Reina family, now led by Gagliano, Joseph Bonanno's faction, Joseph Profaci's family, various smaller families and independent operators who resent Masseria's dominance. The stage is set for war, but this will not be a war of grand battles and formal confrontations. This is gangster warfare conducted in the shadows, marked by assassination and betrayal. where the front line is every street corner and every man is potentially both a killer and a target. The Castellammarese War begins not with a bang, but with a series of whimpers, bodies found in alleys, men who disappear and are never seen again, accidents that everyone knows are murders but can't prove. July 15, 1930, Vito Bonventre, a Masseria loyalist and member of the original Morello family, is found dead. He's been shot multiple times. The murder is attributed to Maranzano's forces, though no arrests are ever made. August 15, 1930. Giuseppe, the clutch hand Morello, the original boss of the Morello family and now Masseria's top advisor, is murdered along with 2 associates. They're found in an office in East Harlem. All 3 shot to death execution style. This is a devastating blow to Masseria. Morello was not just a trusted advisor, but a link to the old days. A man whose reputation and connections were valuable assets. November 5, 1930, Manfredi Menio, the boss of a Brooklyn family allied with Masseria, is murdered along with his underboss, Steve Ferrigno. They're killed as they leave a meeting at Masseria's headquarters, suggesting that Maranzano has intelligence about Masseria's operations, that he knows where and when meetings are happening. The pattern of murders continues through the fall and winter of 1930. The bodies pile up, captains, soldiers, associates, sometimes innocent people who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The newspapers cover the violence breathlessly, running stories about the Italian gang wars with a mixture of fascination and horror. The violence is bad for business. Speakeasies that were once full are now empty because customers are afraid of getting caught in crossfire. Bootlegging operations are disrupted because trucks are being hijacked and drivers killed. Gambling rackets suffer because no one wants to be in a location that might become a target. This is particularly frustrating to Lucky Luciano and the other young Turks in Masseria's organization. They see the war as wasteful, destructive, completely counterproductive. They're losing money every day the war continues. And for what? For Masseria's ego, for his insistence on being the boss of bosses, for his refusal to negotiate or compromise. Luciano begins having secret meetings with members of Maranzano's organization. The conversations are careful, feeling out possibilities, exploring whether there might be a way to end the war that doesn't involve one side completely destroying the other. As the war drags on through the winter of 1930 and into 1931, something begins to happen that worries Masseria deeply. His own men start defecting to Maranzano. These are not low-level soldiers or peripheral associates. These are captains, men with their own crews, men who have been with Masseria for years. They're leaving because they see the war as unwinnable, because they're tired of the violence and disruption, because they've lost faith in Masseria's leadership. Each defection makes Masseria more paranoid, more suspicious of everyone around him. He begins to suspect that there are traitors in his inner circle, that information about his movements and plans is being leaked to Maranzano. He's right to be suspicious, but he's looking in the wrong places. The real threat to Masseria is not any single traitor, but the growing consensus among his own lieutenants that he has become a liability. Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, Joe Adonis. These men have conversations, quiet discussions about what needs to happen, about what the future of organized crime should look like. They all reach the same conclusion. Giuseppe Masseria has to go, not just defeated, not just forced to retire, but killed. His legend is too powerful, his personality too dominant. As long as he's alive, he'll be a rallying point for traditionalists, an obstacle to progress, a source of conflict. But killing Masseria is easier said than done. He's surrounded by bodyguards at all times. He's paranoid and careful, varying his routes, avoiding predictable patterns. He survived multiple assassination attempts before. And most importantly, there are still men loyal to him. Men who would seek revenge if he were killed in an obvious hit by Maranzano's forces. The solution, Luciano realizes, is elegant in its simplicity. Masseria has to be killed by his own men, not by defectors or enemies, but by the people closest to him, the men he trusts most. It has to look like betrayal rather than victory for Maranzano, because that's the only way to prevent Masseria from becoming a martyr. The only way to ensure that his death ends the war rather than escalating it. Luciano reaches out to Maranzano through intermediaries. The message is simple: I can deliver Masseria. In exchange, I want peace, and I want to take over his organization. No more boss of bosses, no more tribute system, no more war. The families operate independently, but cooperate when it serves everyone's interests. Maranzano, who has been looking for a way to end the war without completely destroying Masseria's organization, which would create a power vacuum and likely more violence, agrees. The deal is struck. Now all that remains is the execution. Planning the murder of Giuseppe Masseria requires careful consideration of several factors. It has to happen in a place where Masseria feels safe, where he'll let down his guard. It has to happen in a way that doesn't immediately point to Luciano as the betrayer. He needs to maintain plausible deniability, at least initially, to secure his position as Masseria's successor, and it has to happen soon, before Masseria's paranoia leads him to discover the plot. Luciano spends weeks considering various scenarios, but ultimately he settles on the simplest approach. Invite Masseria to lunch at a restaurant, somewhere public enough to be unthreatening, but quiet enough that the hit can be carried out without too many witnesses. The key is to make it seem like a normal business meeting. Nothing suspicious, just another afternoon with his trusted underboss. The restaurant chosen is Nuova Villa Tamaro, a Coney Island establishment owned by Gerardo Scarpato, a friend of the family. Coney Island is far enough from Masseria's usual territory that it won't seem like business as usual, but not so far that the invitation raises suspicion. The restaurant is small, intimate, the kind of place where two men can have a private conversation without being overheard. Luciano also carefully selects the hit team. He needs men who are loyal to him personally, men who can be trusted to keep their mouths shut, men who won't hesitate when the moment comes. He chooses Albert Anastasia, the brutal enforcer who has killed many men for Masseria, but who is also smart enough to see that the old boss has become an obstacle. Vito Genovese, Luciano's closest ally, the man who killed Gaetano Reina on Masseria's orders, and who understands better than anyone how quickly loyalty can shift in the underworld. Joe Adonis, charming and deadly, who runs much of Masseria's Brooklyn operations, and who has his own ambitions that will be better served by Luciano's leadership than Masseria's. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, the young Jewish gangster who has worked closely with Luciano and Meyer Lansky, who represents the future of multi-ethnic organized crime that Masseria has always resisted. For the getaway driver, Luciano chooses Ciro Terranova, the Artichoke King, a member of the old Morello family who has his own reasons to want Masseria gone. Terranova controls the artichoke trade in New York, hence the nickname, and has chafed under Masseria's demands for tribute. Each of these men is told the plan separately, sworn to secrecy, and given their specific role. They know the stakes if this fails. If Masseria survives, or if the plot is discovered, they will all die horrible deaths, but they also know the rewards. If it succeeds, peace, prosperity, and positions of power in the new order that Luciano is planning to create. The date is set, April 15th, 1931. A Wednesday afternoon, a time when Masseria will be relaxed, when the restaurant won't be too crowded, when everything can proceed according to plan. Now, all that remains is the execution. Before we arrive at that fateful day in April 1931, we must understand the full scope of the Castellammarese. War and the price that was paid in blood for Giuseppe Mezzeria's stubborn refusal to compromise. The war that begins with Gaetano Reina's murder in February 1930 continues for over a year. And the death toll is staggering. Exact numbers are impossible to determine. Many bodies are never found. Some murders are never reported. Some deaths are disguised as accidents or robberies. But conservative estimates suggest that between 50 and 60 men are killed as a direct result of the conflict. These are not just foot soldiers and street thugs. The dead include Gaetano Reina, boss of what would become the Lucchese family, murdered by Vito Genovese on Mezzeria's orders. Giuseppe Morello, the original boss of bosses, murdered along with 2 associates in East Harlem, Vito Bonventra, a Masseria loyalist and member of the original Morello family. Manfredi Mineo, boss of a Brooklyn family allied with Masseria, killed along with his underboss. Steve Ferrigno, underboss Dominic, killed in the same hit. And dozens of others whose names are lost to history, who died in alleys and speakeasies and their own homes, who were shot or stabbed or strangled or thrown off bridges, whose families were told they died in robberies or accidents or simply disappeared. The violence is not limited to the gangsters themselves. Innocent people are caught in the crossfire. Restaurant patrons, pedestrians, family members. A child is wounded when a hit goes wrong, and the shooters spray bullets wildly. A woman is killed when she opens her door to men she thinks are delivering groceries, but who are actually looking for her husband. The newspapers cover the war extensively, running lurid stories about the Italian gang wars and the mafia menace. Politicians call for crackdowns, for more police resources, for stronger laws. Federal agents begin investigating, though their efforts are hampered by the wall of silence that surrounds the underworld. No one talks to the police. No one testifies. No one admits to knowing anything about anything. The violence is also terrible for business. The constant warfare disrupts operations, draws police attention, scares away customers. Bootlegging profits drop as drivers refuse to make deliveries through war zones. Gambling operations suffer as patrons stay home rather than risk getting caught in a shootout. Protection rackets become less profitable as store owners question whether they're actually being protected or just caught between 2 warring factions. By early 1931, the Castellammarese War has reached a strategic stalemate. Neither Masseria nor Maranzano has been able to deliver a knockout blow. Both sides have lost important men. Both sides are exhausted. Masseria still controls the largest single organization, but his power base has been weakened by defections and casualties. He can't move freely anymore. There are entire neighborhoods in Brooklyn that are effectively controlled by Maranzano, areas where Mezzeria's men can't operate without risking ambush. His bootlegging operations have been disrupted, his income has dropped, and he's spending enormous amounts of money on guns, ammunition, and payments to loyal soldiers who are growing increasingly nervous about their prospects. Maranzano, on the other hand, has successfully built a coalition of families that together rival Masseria's strength. But coalition warfare is always difficult. Keeping different families working together, maintaining unity of purpose, ensuring that everyone contributes and no one defects, requires constant attention and diplomacy. Maranzano is spending so much time managing his alliance that he has little time for anything else. His own operations are suffering, and the families in his coalition are beginning to grumble about the cost of the war. Both bosses are also facing pressure from their own men to end the conflict. The Young Turks in particular, Luciano, Genovese, Costolo on Masseria's side, Joe Bonanno, Tommy Lucchese on Maranzano's side, are increasingly vocal about their frustration with the war. They argue that the conflict is counterproductive, that everyone is losing money, that there has to be a better way to resolve disputes than endless murder. But neither Masseria nor Maranzano can back down without losing face. Both have invested too much in the conflict. Too much money, too much blood, too much pride. They've both claimed that the other is the aggressor, the one standing in the way of peace. To compromise now would be to admit weakness, to invite challenges from rivals, to potentially lose the loyalty of their own men, so the war continues, grinding on through the winter of 1931, each side looking for an opening, for some advantage that will allow them to finally deliver the decisive blow. One of the fundamental tensions underlying the Castellammarese War is generational. It's not just a conflict between two bosses or two organizations. It's a conflict between two different visions of what the Italian-American Mafia should be. Giuseppe Masseria represents the old way. He is a mustache Pete, a term used by younger gangsters to describe the older generation of Sicilian mobsters, who cling to the traditions and codes of the old country. Masseria believes in ethnic purity. Only Sicilians, or at most other Italians, should be allowed into the organization. Working with Jews, Irish, or other ethnicities is seen as a betrayal of Sicilian identity. Personal loyalty, relationships matter more than business arrangements. A man's worth is measured by his loyalty to his boss, not by his ability to generate profits, respect, and tradition. The old codes of honor must be maintained. Bosses deserve respect simply by virtue of being bosses. Tribute must be paid to superiors. Territory. Power is measured by control of physical territory, by the ability to say, "This neighborhood is mine," and enforce that claim with violence. Salvatore Maranzano, despite being a traditional Sicilian himself, represents something newer, though still not as modern as what Luciano will eventually create. Maranzano believes in organization, military-style structure with clear hierarchy and defined roles. Efficiency and discipline over personal relationships. Sicilian supremacy, like Masseria. Maranzano believes the Mafia should be exclusively Sicilian, but he's more willing to work with other Italian groups when necessary. Strategic thinking, planning, and patience over impulsive violence. Maranzano studies history and applies lessons from military campaigns to organized crime. Balance of power. No single boss should dominate all others. Families should be independent, but coordinate through a council of equals. But the real future belongs to the young Turks. Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and their generation. They believe in multi-ethnic cooperation. Work with anyone who can be trusted and who can contribute to profits. Jews, Irish, Italians. It doesn't matter as long as the business relationship is sound. Business first. Crime is a business, and like any business, it should be run based on profit and efficiency, not tradition or emotion, reducing violence. Violence is bad for business. It draws police attention, disrupts operations, and creates unpredictable costs. Use violence when necessary, but prefer negotiation and compromise. Corporate structure. Organize crime families like legitimate corporations, with clear divisions of responsibility, accounting, planning, and coordination between organizations. This generational conflict makes the Castellammarese War more than just a power struggle. It's a battle over the future direction of organized crime in America, and increasingly, the young Turks on both sides are realizing that they have more in common with each other than they do with their own bosses. Throughout the winter of 1931, Lucky Luciano conducts a dangerous double game. Publicly, he's Giuseppe Mezzeria's loyal underboss, coordinating operations, managing disputes between captains, representing Masseria in meetings with all eyes. He continues to collect tribute, to enforce discipline, to carry out Masseria's orders, but privately, Luciano is building a shadow organization, a network of relationships and agreements that will become the foundation of a new order once Masseria is gone. He meets regularly with Meyer Lansky, his closest confidant and the man who shares his vision for the future of organized crime. Lansky, despite being Jewish and therefore outside the traditional Italian mafia structure, is brilliant with numbers and organization. Together, Luciano and Lansky sketch out what will eventually become the Commission, a coordinating body of family bosses who meet regularly to resolve disputes, divide territories, and make decisions that affect all of organized crime. Luciano also maintains contact with members of Maranzano's coalition, particularly Joe Bonanno and Tommy Lucchese. These conversations are incredibly dangerous. If Masseria discovers that his underboss is talking to the enemy, Luciano will be killed immediately. But the conversations are also necessary if there's to be any hope of a negotiated end to the war. The message Luciano sends to Maranzano's men is consistent. The war is bad for everyone. Neither side can win decisively. The old bosses, both Masseria and Maranzano, are stuck in the past, clinging to traditions and grudges that serve no purpose except to drain everyone's profits. There needs to be a new way, a modern approach that serves the interests of all the families. Joe Bonanno, who will later write a memoir describing this period, recalls being impressed by Luciano's vision and his willingness to think beyond traditional Sicilian boundaries. Bonanno himself is young enough to see the merit in Luciano's ideas, even though he's fighting on Maranzano's side. But Luciano also knows that his vision for the future cannot be realized as long as Giuseppe Mezeria is alive. Masseria will never accept the kind of power-sharing arrangement that Luciano envisions. He will never agree to be just another boss among equals. His entire identity is wrapped up in being Joe the boss, the man who can dodge bullets, the most powerful gangster in New York. So Luciano makes his decision. Masseria has to die, and Luciano himself has to be the one to arrange it. Sometime in early 1931, the exact date is lost to history, something happens that nearly derails Luciano's entire plan. Giuseppe Mezeria discovers the betrayal. It's not clear how he finds out. Perhaps one of Luciano's meetings was observed. Perhaps someone talks. Perhaps Masseria, paranoid after months of war and defections, simply puts together enough pieces to see the larger picture, whatever the reason. Masseria concludes that Lucky Luciano is planning to betray him. And in the world of the Mafia, there is only one response to betrayal: death. Masseria orders a hit on Luciano. The details are scarce, but according to later accounts, Masseria assigns the job to some of his most trusted gunmen, men who are still loyal to the old boss, men who haven't been corrupted by Luciano's modern ideas. But Luciano has allies that Masseria doesn't know about. Joe Adonis, who is publicly still a Masseria loyalist, but who has secretly joined Luciano's plot, hears about the planned hit. Adonis immediately warns Luciano, giving him enough time to take precautions, to surround himself with guards, to avoid situations where he might be vulnerable. The hit never happens, whether Masseria changes his mind, whether the gunmen get cold feet, or whether they simply can't find an opportunity. Luciano survives. But the incident makes one thing crystal clear: time is running out. If Masseria has figured out that Luciano is plotting against him, even if he doesn't know the full extent of the conspiracy, then the hit on Masseria has to happen soon. Before Masseria can strike first, Luciano accelerates his plans. The meeting with Maranzano's representatives is arranged. The deal is struck. Luciano will deliver Masseria, and in exchange the war will end. Luciano will take over Masseria's organization, and a new structure will be implemented, not Maranzano as boss of bosses, but a commission of equals. Maranzano agrees, though whether he truly intends to honor this agreement, or whether he's simply willing to say anything to war and eliminate his primary rival, is a question that will only be answered later. The final preparations are made. The hit team is assembled and briefed. The restaurant is chosen. The date is set. April 15th, 1931, a Wednesday afternoon. Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant in Coney Island. Giuseppe Joe the boss, Masseria, has less than 2 weeks to live. The first 2 weeks of April 1931 are tense for everyone involved in the conspiracy to kill Giuseppe Mezeria. Lucky Luciano has to maintain his normal routine, has to act as if nothing has changed, has to continue being the loyal underboss while planning his boss's murder. Masseria, for his part, is increasingly paranoid. The war has dragged on for over a year. His organization has been weakened. Men he trusted have defected or died. He suspects everyone and trusts no one, except, crucially, Lucky Luciano. Luciano has been with him for over a decade. Luciano owes him everything. Luciano has fought for him, killed for him, made him money. Surely Luciano, of all people, remains loyal. This faith in Luciano is Mezzeria's fatal blind spot. He can imagine betrayal from almost anyone else, but not from the man he thinks of almost as a son, the man he personally recruited and trained and elevated to the highest levels of the organization. During these final days, Luciano is careful to reinforce this trust. He meets with Masseria regularly, discusses strategy, offers advice, shows deference and respect. He's playing a role, and he plays it perfectly, because his life depends on it. If Masseria suspects anything, if he has even a moment's doubt, the whole conspiracy will collapse. And Luciano will be dead within hours. The other conspirators, Anastasia, Genovese, Adonis, Siegel, also maintain their normal routines. They continue their work, continue their collections, continue acting as if everything is normal, but privately they're preparing. Guns are obtained and test-fired. Escape routes are planned. Alibis are established. Ciro Terranova, who will drive the getaway car, make sure the vehicle is in perfect working order. The last thing anyone needs is for the car to break down or stall at a critical moment. Gerardo Scarpato, the owner of Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant, is brought into the conspiracy. He's told what's going to happen in his establishment, and he's given a choice: cooperate and be rewarded, or refuse and face the consequences. Scarpato, recognizing that he has no real choice, agrees to cooperate. On the day of the hit, he'll make sure the restaurant is mostly empty, that there are no inconvenient witnesses, that the police response is slow. Everything is planned down to the smallest detail, and yet, everyone involved knows that no plan survives contact with reality. Something could go wrong. Masseria could change his mind about lunch. He could bring extra bodyguards. He could sense something is wrong and leave before the hit can be carried out. Any number of things could derail the conspiracy. But they've committed now. There's no turning back. Either Masseria dies on April 15th, or everyone involved in the conspiracy will likely die shortly thereafter. April 15th, 1931. Dawns clear and relatively warm for mid-April in New York. Spring is arriving, bringing with it the promise of renewal, of new beginnings for Giuseppe Masseria. It will bring something else entirely. Masseria wakes in his home, has breakfast, reads the newspapers. The papers are full of stories about the ongoing gang war, about the latest murder, about politicians calling for action against organized crime. Masseria reads these stories with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. Let the politicians talk. Let the newspapers write their breathless stories. He is still here, still powerful, still the boss. Lucky Luciano calls around mid-morning. He wants to meet with Masseria to discuss some business. Nothing urgent, nothing that can't wait. But Luciano thinks it would be good for them to talk somewhere quiet, somewhere away from the usual haunts where they might be interrupted or overheard. Luciano suggests lunch at Nuova Villa Tamaro in Coney Island. It's a good restaurant, quiet, out of the way. They can talk business, enjoy a good meal, maybe play some cards afterward. Just two peasants spending an afternoon together. Masseria agrees. Why wouldn't he? It's Luciano, his most trusted lieutenant. And Coney Island in April is lovely, with the ocean breeze and the boardwalk and the smell of salt air. Yes, lunch sounds perfect. They agree to meet at the restaurant around 3:30 p.m. A late lunch, which means the restaurant will have finished its main service. And they'll have the place mostly to themselves. Perfect for private conversation. Luciano hangs up the phone and takes a deep breath. It's done. The trap is set. Now comes the hard part, following through. He makes several more calls, brief, coded conversations that tell the hit team that everything is proceeding according to plan. The team begins to assemble, preparing for their afternoon's work. Each man checks his weapon, makes sure he has enough ammunition, says whatever prayers he needs to say to steel himself for what's coming. Vito Genovese, who has killed before, is calm and professional. Albert Anastasia, who has killed many times, is almost eager. Joe Adonis is nervous but determined. Bugsy Siegel, the youngest of the group, treats it almost like a game. With the casual sociopathy that will eventually make him famous, Ciro Terranova gets the car ready, checking the engine, making sure the gas tank is full, planning his route from the restaurant to safety. Everything is ready. Now they just have to wait for the appointed time. Giuseppe Mezeria leaves his home around 2:30 p.m., giving himself plenty of time to reach Coney Island. He takes 2 bodyguards with him, not because he's expecting trouble, but because a man in his position always has bodyguards. It's a sign of power, of importance, of being someone worth protecting. The drive to Coney Island takes them through Brooklyn, through neighborhoods that Masseria has controlled for years. He looks out the window at the streets, at the stores paying him protection money, at the speakeasies selling his bootleg liquor, at the gambling dens and social clubs where his men conduct business. This is his kingdom, built over decades through violence and cunning and sheer force of will. He thinks about the war with Maranzano, about how long it's dragged on, about how much it's cost. He's tired of it, truth be told. Tired of the constant vigilance, tired of losing men, tired of the disruption to business. He's been thinking about reaching out to Maranzano, about seeing if there might be some basis for negotiation, for ending the conflict without either side losing too much face. Maybe he'll talk to Luciano about it today. Luciano is smart, diplomatic, good at seeing angles that Masseria might miss. Yes, that's a good idea. They'll have lunch, they'll play some cards, and they'll talk about how to end this stupid war. Masseria arrives at Nuova Villa Tamaro around 3:20 p.m. Slightly early. The restaurant is small, tucked away on a quiet street in Coney Island. Not the kind of place that draws attention. Perfect for a private meeting, inside. Gerardo Scarpato greets him warmly. Yes, Mr. Luciano has already called ahead. A table is ready, the best table in the house. Private and quiet. Can he get Mr. Masseria something to drink while he waits? Masseria orders wine and settles in to wait. The bodyguards take up positions. One outside by the car, one inside near the door. Everything is routine, normal, safe. Lucky Luciano arrives 15 minutes later. Right on time, he greets Masseria warmly, orders his own wine, and the 2 men settle in for lunch. For the next 2 hours, Giuseppe Mezeria and Lucky Luciano eat and talk and drink like the old friends they are. Or at least like the old friends Masseria believes they are. The food is excellent. Pasta with red sauce, veal, fresh bread. More wine. Scarpato, the owner, makes sure every dish is perfect. Make sure the wine glasses are never empty. Make sure the 2 men have everything they need. They talk business, discussing recent developments in the war, debating strategies, considering options. Luciano is careful to act completely normal, to show no sign of what's coming. He laughs at Masseria's jokes, nods thoughtfully at his observations, offers advice that sounds sincere, because in some ways it is. Even though Luciano is planning to kill Masseria in the next hour, he still respects the man's intelligence and experience. Masseria, for his part, is relaxed in a way he hasn't been for months. The food is good, the wine is better, and the company is comfortable here in this quiet restaurant. Away from the constant stress of the war, he can almost forget about Maranzano and defections and bodies in the street. Here, for a little while, he can just be Giuseppe Masseria, a man enjoying a good meal with a friend. After lunch, they play cards, Pinnacle, a game popular among Italian immigrants, a game Masseria has played since his youth in Sicily. The cards slap down on the table, they talk strategy, make jokes about each other's plays, they drink more wine outside. Ciro Terranova parks the getaway car in position. Inside the car, hidden under blankets on the floor, are four men with guns: Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Bugsy Siegel. They've been there for over an hour, waiting, sweating in the confined space, checking their weapons again and again to make sure everything is ready. Luciano checks his watch, 5:20 p.m., time to end this. Lucky Luciano lays down his cards and stands up from the table. "Scusami, boss," he says. "Il bagno, excuse me, boss, the bathroom." Masseria waves him away without looking up from his cards. Already planning his next play. It's just Luciano going to the bathroom. Nothing to worry about, he'll be back in a minute. And the game will continue. Luciano walks toward the bathroom in the back of the restaurant. But he doesn't go into the bathroom. Instead, he keeps walking out the back door, away from what's about to happen. He's not going to be in the room when it happens, not because he's squeamish, but because he needs plausible deniability when the police ask questions. When Masseria's remaining loyal men demand answers, Luciano needs to be able to say that he was in the bathroom. He didn't see anything, he doesn't know who did it. As soon as Luciano exits through the back, the front door of the restaurant opens. Four men enter, moving quickly but not running, guns already in their hands. Gerardo Scarpato, the owner, suddenly remembers urgent business in the kitchen and disappears. The bodyguard near the door starts to reach for his weapon, but freezes when he sees how many guns are pointed at him. The smart move is to stand still, hands visible, and hope they're only here for Masseria. Giuseppe Masseria looks up from his cards. For just a moment, less than a second, he sees the four men, sees the guns, understands what's happening. His hand moves toward his own gun, a reflex honed over decades of violence, but he's too slow. He's 55 years old, full of pasta and wine, relaxed for the first time in months. And they're young and fast and determined, and have been planning this moment for weeks. The first shot catches him in the back as he tries to rise from his chair. The second hits him in the head, a kill shot that ensures there will be no miraculous recovery this time. The third and fourth shots hit him in the chest as he falls. Insurance rounds to make absolutely certain that the man who could dodge bullets finally cannot dodge anymore. Giuseppe, Joe the Boss, Masseria, the man who survived impossible odds, who earned his legend in a hail of bullets in 1922, who built an empire on bootleg whiskey and blood, who ruled New York's underworld for nearly a decade, falls to the floor of Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant with cards still clutched in his dead hand. The four shooters don't stay to admire their work. They're already moving toward the door, toward the waiting car where Ciro Terranova is supposed to be behind the wheel, ready to drive them to safety. But when they reach the car, they find Terranova frozen in panic, hands shaking, unable to turn the key. The legend says that Bugsy Siegel, disgusted, shoved Terranova out of the driver's seat and drove the getaway car himself. With the Artichoke King cowering in the passenger seat, the car speeds away from Nuova Villa Tamaro, carrying the four men who have just changed the course of American organized crime. Behind them, in the restaurant, Giuseppe Mezeria lies dead on the floor, his blood pooling around the overturned table, his cards scattered across the checkered linoleum. His eyes staring at nothing. The man who could dodge bullets has finally been dodged by fate itself. Lucky Luciano emerges from the bathroom several minutes after the shooting. He looks around the restaurant, takes in the scene, the overturned table, the body on the floor, the smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air, and his face registers what appears to be shock and horror. "Boss! Boss!" He rushes to Masseria's body, checks for a pulse he knows won't be there, then looks up at the bodyguard who is still standing near the door. Hands raised very carefully, not doing anything that might get him killed. "What happened? Who did this?" Luciano's voice is anguished, confused, desperate. The bodyguard shakes his head. "I don't know, Mr. Luciano. 4 men. They came in with guns. They shot the boss and left. I didn't see their faces." It's a lie, of course. The bodyguard saw their faces clearly, but he's smart enough to know that identifying the killers would be a death sentence. Better to claim ignorance to survive. To see which way the wind blows before committing to any particular version of events. Luciano nods, accepts this obvious lie because that's the game everyone is playing. "Call the police," he says. "And call everyone." By everyone, he means the other captains in Masseria's organization. The men who will need to be told that their boss is dead, that everything is about to change, that anyone who wants to survive needs to understand that the old order has ended and a new order is beginning. The police arrive within minutes. Coney Island precinct detectives, eventually representatives from the NYPD's Italian squad, who specialize in organized crime. They find Luciano sitting at a table near Masseria's body, looking devastated, his head in his hands. The police interview him. What happened? Where was he when the shooting occurred? Did he see the shooters? Does he know who might have wanted Masseria dead? Luciano's answers are perfect. He was in the bathroom. He heard shots. He came out and found his boss dead. No. He didn't see the shooters. As for enemies, well, there's a war on, isn't there? It could have been Maranzano's men. Could have been someone settling an old grudge. Could have been anyone. The boss had many enemies. The police don't believe him. Of course, they know that Lucky Luciano was the only other person in the restaurant with Masseria, that he has the most to gain from Masseria's death, that this assassination has his fingerprints all over it, even if they can't prove it. But knowing and proving are two different things. Without witnesses willing to testify, without physical evidence linking Luciano to the shooting, without anyone willing to break the code of silence that governs the underworld, there's nothing the police can do. They let Luciano go, and he walks out of the restaurant into a New York evening that feels different somehow. Lighter, full of possibility. Behind him, police photographers document the scene, capturing images that will become famous. Giuseppe Masseria lying dead on the floor, cards scattered around him, the ace of diamonds visible near his outstretched hand. The legend of the man who could dodge bullets has ended where it began, in a storm of gunfire on a New York street. But this time, there will be no miraculous survival, no bullet-riddled hat, no legend reborn. This time, Giuseppe is simply dead. Another casualty of a changing world that had no place for men like him. The Castellammarese War is over. A new era is about to begin. News of Giuseppe Mazzeria's death spreads through New York's underworld like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knows. Joe the boss is dead, killed by his own men, betrayed by Lucky Luciano. The man who survived Umberto Valenti, who dodged bullets in 1922, who built the most powerful crime family in New York, has been brought down not by his enemies, but by his own lieutenant. The reaction among Masseria's men is mixed. Some are outraged, demanding vengeance, insisting that Luciano must die for this betrayal. But these men are quickly isolated, marginalized, convinced to see reason by men with guns who make it clear that the old regime is gone and resistance is futile. Most of Masseria's captains and soldiers, however, accept the new reality with surprising speed. They're pragmatists, survivors who understand that in the world of organized crime, loyalty lasts only as long as it's profitable. Masseria is dead. Luciano is alive and clearly has the backing of powerful allies, and continuing to fight would be suicide. Better to bow to the inevitable, to accept Luciano as the new boss, to get back to business. Luciano moves quickly to consolidate his power. Within days of Masseria's death, he holds a meeting with all the captains in what was Masseria's organization and is now his. He makes his pitch. The war is over. Masseria's death was necessary to end the bloodshed. Now it's time to rebuild, to make money, to work with other families instead of fighting them. Most importantly, Luciano announces that he's meeting with Salvatore Maranzano to negotiate a permanent peace. No more wars over territory or tribute. No more senseless killing. A new structure for organized crime that will benefit everyone. The captains, tired of war and eager to get back to making money, agree. Some because they genuinely believe in Luciano's vision, others because they recognize they have no choice. But all of them understand that the old way is gone forever. A few days after Masseria's death, Lucky Luciano meets with Salvatore Maranzano to formalize the end of the Castellammarese War. The meeting takes place in a neutral location, with representatives from all the major families present. Maranzano appears to be gracious in victory. He praises Luciano for having the courage to do what was necessary. He speaks eloquently about the need for peace, for cooperation, for a new structure that will prevent future wars. And then Maranzano unveils his vision for the future of the Italian-American Mafia. Drawing on his knowledge of Roman history and military organization, he proposes a new structure, 5 families in New York, each controlling specific territories and operations, each led by a boss with absolute authority over his own organization. The 5 families will be the Luciano family, formerly Masseria's organization, controlling Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn, led by Lucky Luciano; the Mangano family, controlling Brooklyn waterfront and labor operations, led by Vincent Mangano, with Albert Anastasia as underboss; the Gagliano family, formerly the Reina family, controlling the Bronx, led by Tommy Gagliano, with Tommy Lucchese as underboss; the Profaci family, controlling parts of Brooklyn, led by Joseph Profaci; the Bonanno family, controlling parts of Brooklyn and Queens, led by Joseph Bonanno. It's a brilliant organizational structure, clear and logical, and it's largely adopted in the form Maranzano proposes. But then Maranzano makes a fatal mistake. He declares himself capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses, the supreme authority over all 5 families. This is exactly what Lucky Luciano and the other young Turks fought to prevent. They didn't kill Giuseppe Masseria just to replace him with another dictator. They wanted a system of equals. A commission where families could coordinate without any single boss having supreme authority. Luciano says nothing at the meeting. He smiles, he nods. He appears to accept Maranzano's declaration. But privately, he's already making plans. Salvatore Maranzano has just signed his own death warrant. For exactly 4 months and 26 days, Salvatore Maranzano rules as the self-declared boss of bosses. On the surface, it's a peaceful period. The war is over. Bootlegging operations resume at full capacity. Money flows freely again. The streets of New York are no longer war zones. But beneath the surface, tension is building. The other bosses resent Maranzano's claim to supremacy. They particularly resent his demands for tribute, his insistence that major decisions must be approved by him, his traditional Sicilian attitudes toward crime and ethnicity. Maranzano compounds these resentments by behaving like an emperor. He rents an office in Manhattan and conducts business like a legitimate executive, receiving visitors, holding court, issuing pronouncements. He styles himself after Julius Caesar, imagining himself as the founder of a new Roman Empire, built on crime instead of conquest. He also makes a critical strategic error. He becomes paranoid about Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese. Maranzano recognizes that these 2 men are popular, ambitious, and fundamentally opposed to his vision of supreme leadership. He decides that they need to be eliminated before they can challenge him. In September 1931, Maranzano summons both Luciano and Genovese to his office. Ostensibly for a business meeting, his plan is to have them killed when they arrive. He's hired Vincent Mad Dog Call, a notorious Irish hitman, to carry out the murders. Call and his men will be waiting in the office, and when Luciano and Genovese arrive, they'll be gunned down. But lucky Luciano has his own intelligence network, and word of the planned hit reaches him before he walks into the trap. Instead of attending the meeting himself, Luciano sends a different kind of delegation to Maranzano's office. On September 10, 1931, 4 men arrive at Salvatore Maranzano's office in the Grand Central Building at 230 Park Avenue. They're dressed as police officers and carry identification that looks legitimate. When they enter the office, they announce that they're there to arrest Maranzano on tax evasion charges. Maranzano is surprised but not overly concerned. He's been arrested before. He has lawyers. He has judges on his payroll. He knows how the system works. Tax charges can be fought. Deals can be made. He tells his bodyguards to stand down and cooperates with the officers. The 4 men separate Maranzano from his guards, taking him into a private office supposedly to discuss the charges. And then they reveal their true identity. They're not police officers. They're killers sent by Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. What happens next is brutal. The 4 men, later identified as associates of the Jewish gangster Meyer Lansky, stab and shoot Maranzano multiple times, the boss of bosses. The man who thought he was building a new Roman Empire dies in his own office, his blood soaking into expensive carpets. His dreams of supremacy dying with him. Vincent Mad Dog Call, who was supposed to be in the office to kill Luciano, arrives 15 minutes too late. He walks into a crime scene instead of a meeting, realizes what has happened, and wisely decides that discretion is the better part of valor. He leaves without collecting his fee, understanding that the balance of power has shifted once again. The legend later develops that Maranzano's death was part of a larger purge, that Luciano ordered the simultaneous murders of dozens of old guard, Sicilian bosses across the country in what became known as the Night of the Sicilian Vespers. This makes for a dramatic story, but historians have largely debunked it. There was no mass purge, no coordinated nationwide hit. Just the murder of one man who tried to be more than his position could sustain. But Maranzano's death accomplishes what Masseria's death began: the complete destruction of the old guard. The final elimination of the Mustache Pete's, who believed in Sicilian supremacy and boss of bosses leadership. The stage is now set for Lucky Luciano to implement his vision for the future of American organized crime. In the aftermath of Maranzano's death, Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky implement the organizational structure they've been planning for years. It's called the Commission, and it represents a revolutionary approach to organized crime. The Commission consists of the bosses of the 5 families in New York, plus bosses from other major cities: Chicago, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Detroit. Each boss has an equal vote. Decisions are made by majority rule. No one boss has authority over another. The Commission's primary purposes are to settle disputes between families before they escalate into wars, to coordinate on operations that affect multiple families, to set policy on interactions with law enforcement and politicians, to approve the murder of bosses, ensuring that leadership changes don't trigger wars, to mediate conflicts over territory and operations. It's a corporate structure applied to crime, and it's remarkably effective. The Commission won't prevent all violence. Mob wars will continue to erupt periodically over the decades, but it will provide a framework for resolving disputes without the kind of prolonged, destructive conflict that characterized the Castellammarese War. The Commission also formalizes something that Luciano has been practicing informally for years: cooperation across ethnic lines, while the 5 families remain Italian. The Commission recognizes and coordinates with Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, Irish mobsters, and eventually other ethnic groups. Crime becomes multi-ethnic, just as legitimate business is multi-ethnic. This is Lucky Luciano's greatest achievement, and it's built directly on the foundation that Giuseppe Mezeria created. Even though it represents everything Mezeria opposed, Masseria built the organizational structure, recruited the talented men, created the bootlegging empire that made everything possible. But it took Mezzeria's death to unlock that potential, to allow those talented men to implement the modern vision. Giuseppe Mezeria has been dead for less than 5 months when the Commission holds its first formal meeting in late 1931. His name is mentioned only in passing as a cautionary tale about what happens when a boss refuses to adapt, when tradition becomes more important than pragmatism. But Mezzeria's influence on American organized crime is deeper and more lasting than these new, modern bosses want to acknowledge. Consider what he accomplished. He survived in an era when the average life expectancy of a mob enforcer was measured in months. Mezzeria lasted decades. He survived wars, assassination attempts, betrayals, and prison. His survival itself became a legend that elevated him above ordinary gangsters. He built structure before Mezzeria. Italian organized crime in New York was chaotic, personality-driven, fragmented. Mezzeria created the template for the modern crime family: captains, soldiers, clear hierarchy, defined territories, systematic operations. The 5 families that replaced him used the organizational model he pioneered. He recognized talent. Mezzeria recruited and promoted some of the most talented criminals of his generation: Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, Joe Adonis. These men went on to dominate organized crime for decades, and they all learned their craft under Masseria. He capitalized on Prohibition. Masseria was one of the first Italian-American gangsters to recognize the massive opportunity that Prohibition represented. He built a bootlegging empire that generated millions of dollars and provided the financial foundation for everything that came after. He demonstrated the limits of the old way. Perhaps most importantly, Masseria showed the next generation what didn't work. His insistence on Sicilian supremacy, his demand to be boss of bosses, his reliance on violence and intimidation over negotiation and compromise. All of these traditional approaches ultimately led to his downfall. The Young Turks learned from his mistakes. In death, Giuseppe Mezeria becomes a symbol. To traditionalists, he represents a golden age when bosses were bosses, when respect meant something, when the mafia was Sicilian and proud of it. To modernizers, he represents everything wrong with the old ways, an obstacle that had to be removed before progress could happen. The truth, as always, is more complicated. Mezeria was neither hero nor villain, neither genius nor fool. He was a product of his time and place, a Sicilian immigrant who brought old world traditions to the new world, who built an empire in the chaos of Prohibition, who adapted enough to succeed, but not enough to survive. The most lasting legacy of Giuseppe Mezeria is not his own accomplishments, but the accomplishments of the men he trained. Consider what happened to his key lieutenants. Lucky Luciano becomes the most powerful gangster in America, running the Luciano family, later the Genovese family. And chairing the commission, he revolutionizes organized crime, turning it from ethnic gangs into a multi-ethnic corporate enterprise. He's eventually imprisoned on prostitution, charges in 1936, and deported to Italy in 1946. But his influence shapes American organized crime for generations. Vito Genovese takes over the Luciano family when Luciano is deported, renaming it after himself. He's a brutal, paranoid boss who rules through fear. More traditional than Luciano, but effective. He's eventually imprisoned on drug trafficking, charges in 1959, and dies in prison in 1969. But his family remains one of the most powerful in America. Frank Caslo becomes the Prime Minister of the underworld, known more for his political connections and business acumen than for violence. He cultivates relationships with politicians, judges, and businessmen, showing how organized crime can infiltrate legitimate society. He survives multiple assassination attempts and retires in the 1950s, dying peacefully in 1973. Albert Anastasia becomes the Lord High Executioner, running Murder, Inc., the enforcement arm of organized crime that carries out hundreds of contract killings. He's eventually murdered in 1957 while getting a haircut in a Manhattan barbershop, a victim of the same kind of internecine warfare that killed his old boss. Joe Adonis becomes a powerful boss in Brooklyn, known for his control of gambling operations and his movie star good looks. He's eventually deported to Italy in 1956 after refusing to testify before congressional committees investigating organized crime. Meyer Lansky, though never formally part of Masseria's organization because he was Jewish, worked closely with Masseria's lieutenants and becomes one of the most important figures in American organized crime. He's the financial genius behind the mob's expansion into Cuba and Las Vegas. And he dies peacefully in 1983, having never served significant prison time despite decades of criminal activity. Bugsy Siegel helps build Las Vegas into the gambling capital it becomes, though he's murdered in 1947 before he can see his vision fully realized. All of these men, all of them, learned their craft under Giuseppe Masseria. He recruited them, promoted them, gave them opportunities to prove themselves, taught them how to run criminal operations, and then, when he became an obstacle to their ambitions, they killed him. It's a pattern that will repeat itself throughout the history of organized crime. The old boss who trains his own killers, who creates the instruments of his own destruction. But it's also a sign of success in its own perverse way. Masseria built something that outlasted him, created an organization and a structure that survived his death, trained men who went on to even greater achievements. The story of Giuseppe Masseria doesn't end with his death in 1931. Over the decades, his legend grows, shaped by books and movies and television shows that romanticize the early days of organized crime in America. The bullet-riddled hat from the 1922 assassination attempt becomes one of the most famous artifacts in mob history, a physical manifestation of his legend as the man who could dodge bullets. Journalists and historians debate whether the story is true, whether the hat really had 2 bullet holes, whether Masseria really walked away unscathed from 20 shots. But the truth is almost irrelevant. The legend is more powerful than the facts. His death in Nuova Villa Tamaro, betrayed by Lucky Luciano while playing cards, becomes the archetypal mob assassination story. It's referenced in movies, recreated in television shows, analyzed in true crime books. The image of the dead boss with cards scattered around him becomes iconic, representing the ultimate betrayal, the student surpassing the teacher through violence. The Godfather Part 2, Francis Ford Coppola's epic crime film, includes a fictionalized version of Masseria as Don Fanucci, an old guard Italian boss who's killed by the young Vito Corleone. While the details are different, the underlying story is the same. The old boss who represents tradition and tyranny, being eliminated by the younger generation who represents modernization and progress. The HBO series Boardwalk Empire features Masseria as a major character played by Ivo Nandi, showing his rivalry with Arnold Rothstein and his eventual betrayal by Lucky Luciano. The show takes dramatic liberties with history, but it captures something essential about Masseria: his appetites, his violence, his refusal to change in each retelling. Masseria becomes more mythic, less human. He's Joe the Boss, The man who could dodge bullets. The Sicilian godfather who ruled New York's underworld. The real man, Giuseppe Mezeria. The tailor's son from Sicily who came to America with nothing and built an empire, fades into obscurity, replaced by legend. Who was Giuseppe Mezeria, really? Strip away the legend, the mythology, the romanticization, and what remains. He was a man born into poverty in Sicily, who fled to America to escape a murder charge, who arrived with nothing and built an empire through intelligence, violence, and ruthless pragmatism. He was a survivor in an era when most men in his profession died young. He was a builder who created organizational structures that outlasted him. He was a leader who inspired loyalty, even as he demanded tribute. He was also a man who loved good food and fine wine, who enjoyed the simple pleasure of a card game with friends, who built restaurants and social clubs where he could feel at home. He was someone who never forgot his Sicilian roots, who clung to the traditions and values of the old country, even as America transformed around him. He was brutal when brutality was required, killing or ordering the deaths of dozens of men who stood in his way or threatened his power. But he was also capable of mercy, of giving second chances, of building long-term relationships based on mutual benefit rather than just fear. He was smart, but not smart enough to see that his own success was creating the conditions for his downfall. He was confident, but that confidence crossed the line into arrogance. He was loyal to his vision of how the world should work, but that loyalty became rigidity that prevented him from adapting to a changing world. And so ends the story of Giuseppe Joe the Boss Mezeria, the Sicilian tailor's son who ruled New York's underworld from 1922 to 1931, survived impossible odds, and ultimately fell victim to the one thing he couldn't control: progress itself. The man who dodged bullets at point-blank range couldn't dodge the future. His lieutenants, Luciano, Genovese, Costello, Anastasia, would go on to build the modern American Mafia on the foundation of his empire, but with a new vision: cooperation over domination, business over bloodshed, adaptation over tradition. If you made it all the way through this journey, you're a true crime history devotee. Drop a comment letting me know what moment in Joe Mezeria's life surprised you most. Was it the legendary 1922 shootout where he earned his nickname, the brutal Castellammarese War, or perhaps the cold calculation of his protege's betrayal? Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on next video. We're diving into the story of the man who killed Masseria and briefly became the most powerful mobster in America, Salvatore Maranzano. Trust me, that story is even more shocking. Share this video with any history buffs or true crime fans in your life. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. It helps us bring more of these deep dive sleepy gangster stories to your late nights. Now, rest easy. Let the story settle into your mind like the rain on those Brooklyn streets in 1931. The past is never truly gone. It echoes in every corner of the cities these men built and the organizations they created. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, even the most powerful empires fall when they refuse to change. Good night.